The Rashomon effect, coined from the famous 1950s Akira Kurosawa film, Rashomon. It describes how a single event can be told in a variety of ways due to the unreliable nature of human memory and perspective. While I'd merely set out to explore the underworld of extreme tubing, after talking with other witnesses to the events in this interview, it was fascinating to hear how the perspectives differed. In the course of the interview, you'll hear from Gareth Fryer, Gary Edgeworth, and Alex Nix as they recall how the events unfolded from their perspectives. If you haven't already listened to my prior interviews with these characters, I encourage you to do so. But either way, you're in for a treat today. But first, a big thanks to the sponsors of today's show who helped make this possible. This episode is sponsored by Four Corners Riversports. To me, Four Corners is exactly what a paddling shop should be. It's staffed with dedicated river people who know the sport inside and out and are all about having fun getting people outside. Four Corners Riversports is located in Durango, Colorado. They are a full-service paddle sports retail and rental store. If you're looking to get on the water, look no further than Four Corners Riversports. Call them at 970-259-3893 or visit their website at www.riversports.com. This episode is also sponsored by Taylor Barker with the group Real Estate Steamboat. I've known and paddled with Taylor for years, and he brings passion to everything he does. Steamboat Springs is a wonderful town with the Yampa River running right through it and has a vibrant and friendly boating community. If you're thinking of making a move to Steamboat or purchasing a vacation home, be sure to get in touch with Taylor. He's happy to give you a lay of the land, the real estate market, and to help find the perfect property for you. You can reach him at 336-314-4353 or by email at taylor@brokerintheboat.com. And you can find those links in the show notes. This podcast is being featured on paddlinglife.com. Paddlinglife.com is run by industry veteran Eugene Buchanan, and it does a wonderful job of finding all the most interesting happenings in the world of paddling and bringing them straight to you in the form of news, interviews, articles, videos, and more. Check out paddlinglife.com. But now it is time for the show. Welcome to Tales from the Cripps, a whitewater storytelling podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Cripps. It was inevitable that my guest today landed on this show. Early on in his kayaking days, I started running rivers with a group of people that paddled with my guest while he was a student at the Colorado School of Mines. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say every time I paddled with that group, I would hear stories about their friend Rolf. Rolf paddled this waterfall that all the team piranha paddlers were walking. Rolf tubed this Class 5 rapid. Rolf almost died in New Zealand. Rolf held his breath for 4 minutes in a hot tub until he passed out. Rolf skied off the roof of this building because someone said he couldn't do it. Rolf soloed the Embudo at flood stage, and the list goes on. In my mind, Rolf was this 7-foot-tall Viking demigod who was so mean he made medicine sick. So I was a little disappointed when I finally ran into him one summer running the Big South, and it turns out he just looks like a regular human being with a nice demeanor, albeit a tall and fit-looking one. But one thing that remained constant was that the Rolf stories just kept coming. And with such a catalog of kayaking stories, well, whitewater stories to choose from, I had to recruit Rolf to come onto the show. So, Rolf Kelly, here we are. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Kevin. That's a really flattering intro that I don't know if I'm deserving of.
Well, we'll find out today whether you deserve it. So I know you had kind of a rough year a couple years ago coming off an injury, but it seems like you're getting after it this year. How's your year been?
A lot better. I'm healed up. I do have a 1-year-old that's sort of making things a little interesting. You know, when I'm on ice climbs or standing in front of a rapid, it's not just me in my head now. It's thinking about others that are dependent on me, which is it's interesting.
Yeah, that seems to happen to everybody in this line of work, let's say.
That's right.
But it sounds like, I mean, I've seen you getting on some good trips still, so you're still getting after it.
Yep, still getting out there, just maybe dialing it back a little bit.
What was the highlight of this past year?
I think it was with Brad Higginbotham and Jason Stingle up in the Northwest running Bridge Creek. That was a really fun overnighter. And then getting up into Squamish area just to do some of the classics up there.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's move into it because we, some people maybe have heard of you before for some stunts you've done. Some people maybe haven't. I don't know. But one thing that you're certainly known for is some extreme tubing that not many people do. So we're gonna kind of feature that today and talk about the history of that. So let's jump straight into it. Like how do you get into this? What leads up to this?
Yes, so it's, you know how they say it takes 10 or 20 years to be an overnight success? And I guess in this case, an overnight tubing success. I put that in quotes because I don't know if there's that much success to be had with anything regarding tubing. But at least it's not an Oregon hillbilly floating down a river with a tube. There was a really long learning curve to this that happened over many years before. I didn't just float off Metlako one day. There was a lot of learning to be done that built up the confidence to be able to do something like that.
I would hope that's the case because it's actually not a joke. Like there's plenty of tragedies from tubing that have been out there. I was in fact present one time when we were in Boulder Creek and it was running high and we were going up and some guy that was in my group saw a guy above the buttress about to tube the buttress, and he actually got out and told him like, hey, this is not a good idea, like you shouldn't do this. And we went up, paddled the run, from up high down into town, and when we got to town everything was roped off and there were like ambulances and police present, and it turned out the guy had actually passed away like trying to run the buttress in the tube. So
wow.
Tubing whitewater is no joke.
Yeah, I guess we should put our disclaimers up front here that it's not something to take lightly, and don't just go grab a tube and jump in a river after you listen to this, because there's plenty of little injuries and learnings and close calls that I had along the way as well.
Yeah. One of the things that I had heard through the stories about you is that you had this amazing breath hold, and that's part of the way you could get away with some of the stuff that you do. So how did that come about? Were you just born that way?
So that actually, I wasn't. And I point to, if you've seen Avatar 2 movie, and Kate Winslet, there's a news feed out there, a short blurb that says she's held her breath underwater for more than 7 minutes. So it's actually a skill that can be developed. Anybody who's been around free divers or free dive themselves, you can build up a skill of holding your breath. It's sort of hyperventilating and oxygenating your blood and actually forcing out all the CO2 in your blood, or at least diminishing the levels such that you can hold your breath for a long time and you resist that urge to breathe.
I've been reading about like some of the Wim Hof stuff around this, right? Because he has very, very similar idea and technique, and they've been doing studies on him and even people that he's trained. And it seems like they have real medical evidence now that this stuff is legit.
I think it is. Yeah, you increase your cortisol levels. He's done some amazing things like sit in an ice bath for 2 hours. So there is some medical benefits. I don't think they understand all of it, but you can believe actually, and you'll see me out on the river or anytime I'm about to run or do something big, I'm doing my own sort of Wim Hof breathing method, which I recommend to anybody running something big. It can mean the difference between holding your breath for a minute that's required when you're getting beat down and not making it and inhaling water.
Is this something you do as a regular practice, or do you just do it when you're getting onto the river or in some situation where you might need it?
I actually practice it with some meditation on occasion as well, but mostly I'll do it on the river during the season out here in Colorado. I'll be puffing away if you see me going into something big.
I've tried following one of the like basic Wim Hof things before, and it's actually kind of unsettling. Like I found it unpleasant. It made, it just makes my fingers start tingling.
Yeah.
My head kind of tingles. Like it feels weird.
That's how you know it's working.
Yeah.
If your head starts to feel light, you get tingling sensation in your fingers and toes, then you know it's working. Like I don't know what that is, if it's the lack of carbon dioxide in the bloodstream at that point or a bunch of oxygen that's causing that. But you'll find if you hold your breath once you got that sensation, you'll hold it 2 or 3 times longer than what you were just before doing that breathing mechanism. And you can train yourself too. Like if you and I could sit here over the course of a day, and by the end of it, I would bet you'd be holding your breath up to 3, maybe even 4 minutes by the end of that.
Wow, that's wild. So you learned these breath skills, and then you started putting them into practice on the river. What?
Actually, I should back up. I learned my own form of the Wim Hof method in New Zealand. There's a story behind it. That's sort of the first big lesson of all this. Is I was on the Turnbull with a really good friend of mine, Gareth Fryer. He's an amazing kayaker. I call him sort of like safety superhero on the river. He's saved my life. He's saved the life of Gordon Banks. He's saved the life of actually several people because he takes safety so darn seriously. And while you're scouting something big and very scary, he's often scouting, how could this go wrong? And how do I get to this position to help out? And he's just done some amazing feats. He's a sort of an athletic freak of nature. The first time I kayaked with him was on a hike down in New Zealand, and he shouldered his boat in the parking lot and started jogging up the trail. I did everything I could to keep up and couldn't really, and was about to puke by the time I got to the put-in. But yeah, he is a freak of nature, and he.
So I guess moving on to my one of my more exciting days on the river with Rolf. We went down. I guess I'll give you the full story. So Pete, who was Rolf's friend, had this chick who was turning up.
Is this Pete Urslev? Is that who it was?
Pete Urslev had a chick named Heather who was turning up from the States, kind of thing. And so initially we were thinking that she was Pete's girlfriend, possibly, which surprised us a little bit. But anyway, and so she turned up. I met her at, I think, day 2 of her being in New Zealand, and I was instantly starstruck. She was quite a little honey. And it wasn't aware that Rolf on day 1 had already done the groundwork on this situation. And so, yeah, she wasn't Pete Ursley's girl at this point. So anyway, so we all set off on a road trip together, and it had some interesting dynamics. This girl it's not her fault. It was our doing, our hearts or emotions or whatever. But little bit of a momentary wedge, not in a bad way, but yeah, like it definitely had a little impact on our relationship as that trip continued further. But I think the first river we went down to was called the Turnbull, which is a lovely, beautiful mountain river that resembles a lot of New Zealand heli runs, but you can actually drive or walk, or in some instances, if you can't get the key to the lake, to the gate, you can ride your bike with your kayak on your shoulder and do shuttles to get into there, kind of thing, to run this river, kind of thing. And I would like to just say that a very good New Zealand paddler, Jeremy Norbury, unfortunately just passed away on this river very recently. And so, my heart, many people's hearts go out to his friends and family. And that was an unfortunate situation. On our day on the river, or the night before, part of my paddling, I guess going back to those stories of sizing up other paddlers and the psychological testing. I live my life by the light bulb, as I call it. And when the light bulb tells me to do something, I generally don't question the light bulb too much, and I just do what the light bulb tells me to do. There's a book called The Dice Man, and I think the author's name Luke Reinhardt or something like that. I started reading it when I was in the States, and when I was in Nepal. And anyway, this chap lives his life by the dice, and he'll write down 5 or 6 options, and he'll roll the dice, and then he'll carry out whatever option the dice have told him to do.
Oh, wow.
And he gets himself in a whole world of trouble. So anyway, I used to use the light bulb a little bit. And so the light bulb saved my life a few times, and it's also got me in a world of trouble. But the night before, I don't know what it was, and it's a fine line between having concerns, feeling a premonition, and just letting your nerves and your fear get the better of you, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And so we were camped out down on the West Coast, raining pretty hard, and you need a little bit of the rain for this river to be good, but you don't want too much, and that's the key kind of thing. And so I was a little bit anxious, but I definitely had a little bit of premonition factor going on that night or that morning kind of thing. And I can't remember if I discussed it. We had a weird situation where Rolf was further ahead with the young lady, yet the young lady didn't have a tent, so the young lady was sleeping in the back of my van, which was a slightly weird situation. Nothing was happening, but I was providing the accommodation. And so I can't remember if I expressed to her in advance. I remember having a conversation definitely about it afterwards and stuff. But anyway, something in my mind sparked that something was going to kick off that day, and it was going to be more to do with Rolf rather than me. And I know that sounds super weird, but that was the thought I had. And I've had that thought on other occasions, down to quite specific things, and that thing has almost sort of transpired. Hopefully I haven't manifested that thing happening. So anyway, we get to the river, and the river's muddy brown, which is not a flow that you would normally paddle the Turnbull at necessarily. Rolf and I are in creek boats, and we are pretty strong with where we're at in our paddling at the moment, and at that time of our lives kind of thing. And so just before we're about to put on, 2 Irish guys rock up who wanted to join us, and they were in playboats, and reasonably sliced playboats. And we weren't totally into that or on board with that, and that was a little bit weird and not quite right and all of that. But somehow in the mix of things, we still all put on the river together kind of thing. And they were pretty good. We were cruising down the river, and
basically him and I were on the Turnbull. It had been raining all night. It's a pretty steep creek down in New Zealand. I can't remember the gradient, but maybe it's dropping 200 or 300 feet a mile in the steepest parts. And the river had come up. It was flowing brown in flood stage. And we decided to put on anyway, and that was not a good idea.
Yeah, we were doing all right. It probably wasn't the ultimate teamwork that I would have wanted looking back at it, or even in the moment, but it also wasn't terrible kind of thing. And Rolf and I were largely leading slightly, and we got down to above a rapid where I've seen some weird stuff in the sense that we've been paddling that river on other days at other flows, and we've found a kayak there, we've found a paddle there, and we've retrieved that gear. And so it's been etched in my memory as like a weird little spot that obviously likes to create carnage or collect stuff. And so I had reminded Rolf, like, remember that's that thing just down there below us. Because I think from memory we'd done the river more recently at some lower flows as well, and probably spoken about that same spot. And so I pull out, and just between us and that spot, there was quite a sticky hole, and quite a big hole. And I navigated past that all right, and then I would have eddied out near the nasty spot, just so that it's still in my boat, but just to keep an eye on that while Rolf came through, because I really like to sort of roll as a as a tight unit, let's say, and do a lot of protection where we can. Like to get out of my boat and pre-protect spots before things kick off, and that's kind of how I've grown and learned, and how I've helped keep people alive throughout my paddling career. And so Rolf gets caught in this hole and has a bit of a surf, which probably throws off his focus and momentum and all of that. And the next moment he washes up onto this jumble of rocks where we'd found boats and paddles before. And the way that he tries to sort of brace onto it, his paddle was in quite a sort of beyond vertical type position. And the blade was probably wedged down amongst some rocks. And so instantly I think the blade and the paddle was stuck. And I can't remember if it was so stuck that he couldn't pull it out or he just didn't want to break his paddle. So he let go of that and then came off that. And then the next moment he was upside down trying to hand roll. And I can't remember, and maybe didn't even know on the day, just how solid his hand roll was, and where he was trying to hand roll anyway was always going to be a bit of a challenge kind of thing. And so basically he was heading down a flow of water that was probably 8 to 12 feet wide, muddy brown, but it's not the main flow of the river. And at the end of this, so it's probably, I don't know, 100, 150 feet long. And at the end of that, I can see a rock, which is probably, sorry, I'm trying to do the conversion here for you. It's probably 12 to 15 feet high. And there's a bit of a buffer on it, and there was an eddy on the left. And so my strategy at that moment then, rather than giving Rolf the tail of my boat, because I felt that was going to be ineffective because there's a lot of flow washing at this bluff and then disappearing out of sight, I felt that it was actually better. And this was a split-second decision. Whether it was the right decision or not, who knows. But I felt that it was better for me to race past him, grab the eddy on the left just beside this bluff that has a buffer wave on it, to try and situate myself there and then give him one end of my boat or my paddle, or be able to reach him or whatever I had going on kind of thing. And so anyway, I get into that position. He comes down. I think he's already let go of his boat at this stage probably, but he's beyond my reach. And he's, for a few moments, just the helmet, the top of his helmet and the forehead part of his helmet were just above water level as he's body surfing this buffer wave basically out of my reach. And in the next moment, he's sucked around the corner. And I know, I just know that that's 3, 4, 5 meter, not 5, 3, 4, 4.5 meter drop of some description. I have no idea whether it's a single drop or a waterfall or rapid or whatever kind of thing. So something, 12, 15 feet high again. So this is my best buddy in the shit disappearing off the horizon line. And so, I'm all in and I'm off to get him. And so I give him just a couple of seconds and then I pull out and go around this corner. And luckily, it turns out that it's a ramping waterfall type drop, fairly steep. That's probably 4 meters high maybe or something like that. And so I boof this thing as best I can. And when I land, for a split second, I can't see him. And I remember thinking, oh shit, I hope he's not underneath me. And there was an undercut straight ahead. And so I still couldn't see him around me. As I went past that undercut, I scanned that quickly and I couldn't see any sign of him. And then below that, there was another undercut just around the corner. So quickly scan that again, go in behind that, start getting out of my boat.
I ended up swimming and getting the river was outside the banks, and I got flushed into a sieve and basically was underwater for probably, we're trying to guess because it's hard to tell at this point. Gareth would have a better sense of that, but he was able to run the rapid, get out, hike back up to the rapid, and he was standing above it on a cliff. It was kind of a mini gorge, little cliff. And
I'm already fairly anxious at this moment. I've been around, haven't been around death on the river, but I've been around a lot of near death at this stage. And Rolf's parents were turning up in the country about 2 days later, and so I definitely had a quick thought of, oh no, I'm going to have to tell them their son is dead. And so I quickly grab my throw bag and my pin kit out of the back of my kayak. And as I'm running back up, I stop at both of these undercuts to try and scan it again to see if I can see anything. And there's no sign of anything. And so I climb up on top of the original boulder or cliff or whatever that was forming where the buffer wave was that Rolf was body surfing at when I last saw him. Climb up there, and then I scream, probably with a few swear words thrown in, at these Irish guys to get down to where I was, because they were probably out of their boats. So I honestly can't remember. I think they were out of their boats, but for them to get from where they were to where I was probably going to take 10 minutes at the fastest. And so I'm freaking out, and I can't see Rolf, and I don't know where he is. And I'm scanning around me and stuff. And then the next moment, a glint of color catches my eye. And so halfway down this, or 2/3 of the way down this ramping waterfall thing, I see that there's a log of wood which is just breaking the surface, like barely breaking the surface, and it's wet and it's slimy. It's not dry. And I can see Rolf's body around this log, and he's 2 to 3 feet underwater, and I'm not seeing any signs of movement. And so I knew where I was at as far as what I can swim down, what I can jump off. I had a pretty good understanding of where I was at physically. And so without hesitation, I jumped off the top of that rock, jumping upstream to where the flow that he'd got swept down and the main river had a slight convergence zone. And so I landed into that convergence zone thinking that, hoping that it was deep enough that I wasn't going to break my leg or something on impact, but also knowing that would give me a moment of time to surface, collect myself, and then swim to the rock ledge beside this waterfall without getting swept down the main current. So that wasn't really a big deal for me, to be honest. And so I climbed on this rock ledge, and straight away realized the difficulty of this situation, because if you think of this rock ledge as being like a steep mountain range, basically, and the side of it that went down to the water flow where Rolf was stuck was super, super steep and slippery. And so there was no way for me to get close to him. And again, this is split second thinking, but the only two options that I could imagine in that moment were to jump, which was probably a jump of maybe 6 feet from the top of the pinnacle of this rock onto the top of the slippery log that's just sticking out of the water. And that log was only a foot, or it wasn't even a foot across, to be honest. It was smaller than that. Jump onto that, land on it on one leg, stay balanced, and then reach in and try and save my buddy's life. And that's not a winning option. And the only other option was to jump and grab that log with my hands and hang off it and try and hold on while the force of the water is trying to rip me off, and then reach in and get Rolf. And that wasn't a winning option either. But as I saw it, they were the only two options I had up my sleeve. And if you had a paddle hook, or I carry like a clamp that I can clamp an open carabiner with a rope attached, or throw rope attached into it, so it gives me another couple of meters of reach. Maybe you could have used something like that to reach in and clip to him. But realistically, if there's any sort of a decent flow, which there is, trying to stick a paddle into a flow of water, even if you've got it, in there neutrally, you're kind of pushing shit uphill to try and achieve that and stuff. And so basically I only had those two options, and they both sucked. But again, that was my buddy drowning there. And I was literally split seconds away from taking action on one of those and committing to it. And I honestly don't know which one it was, because they were both terrible. But I was about to go. And then luckily for me, The next moment, Rolf washed off the stick, and I jumped into the river, which I didn't see as a big deal either, and I swam him to the sides. And I was in tears the moment I gathered him up, because I thought up until that point I was pulling a body of my best friend out of the river, and so I was very relieved that he was alive, kind of thing.
I eventually flushed out. And mind you, it's a flood stage river, and he's just himself, no boat at this point. And one of the biggest courageous acts of heroism I've ever seen, he jumped into and off the cliff into the river and grabbed my lifeless body. And I can tell you, it was lifeless. I didn't have any feeling in arms or legs or anything by that point. I was basically on the brink of passed out. And he grabbed a 180-pound sack of potatoes and swam with it.
Sure.
And I do remember he was crying. So it was a very, very intense experience. But he dragged me out of the river and saved my life. And it was sort of the big first lesson that I learned. And I started toying with holding my breath after that point, because I was basically on the verge of death.
I did the work to get us to the side of the river and stuff. And so what ended up happening was Rolf was wearing I won't name the brand, but because it could have been any brand, but he was wearing a waist throw bag. And he had just bought one over for me, and I was wearing one on the same day as well. And so it turns out, so he was wrapped like a staple around that log, but to further complicate it, the waistband of that throw bag was trapping him on that wood.
Really?
And the quick release wouldn't release. So when I tell that story to people, I say the things that saved Rolf's life that day were, and I know that he's spoken to you about his breath holding and stuff, and that's something that I used to muck around in science class. And again, some of that was for shits and giggles and like trying to push past the 3-minute mark. And now and again, we were doing silly things that made us go unconscious in science class and stuff as a 16-year-old and stuff. But yeah, it was only when Rolf mentioned that recently, I was like, oh yeah, I used to do that too. Maybe that's actually helped me with a few things in life. But yeah, Rolf obviously used to practice holding his breath and stuff as part of his paddling. And, he had a few idiosyncrasies to his paddling. He used to paddle with, it was quite an open, I wouldn't call it a canoe polo mask, but he had like a
vertical bar,
horizontal bar on it as well, and I'm not into those. And he would put a mouth guard on in some rapids too, and I'd take the piss on him about trying to preserve stuff. But anyway, that was what he believed in and how he rolled, and that worked for him and stuff. But yeah, the breath holding obviously worked for him. But I would say the biggest thing that saved Rolf's life that day was the fact that I describe him as simply as a stubborn motherfucker. And he was under there that day, and he decided and told himself that he was not going to die there that day, and so he didn't stop fighting, and as I said to you earlier on before we started this interview, I've had a bad experience as well, and in my experience, I did give up the fight, and there's part of me that's always questioned, did I give up too easily? Am I a pussy? Whatever. But yeah, so Rolf was under there. He was stubborn and he was like, I'm not giving up today, and I really think that was a contributing factor in him not dying, because I think a lot of people would have died in that situation, because realistically, I wasn't able to help him. And what I would have tried to do, and I've been involved in some rescue situations that have seemed, whether it's adrenaline flowing or whatever, but I've been involved in some stuff where the impossible has been achieved. But that was a pretty shitty situation for Rolf, basically. So yeah, I was super relieved to get him to the side. And
what was he completely lifeless when you were pulling him out? Was there any signs of life?
He was conscious. He was talking. He was good to go. He was probably shaken up, but like I say, I was the one in tears. He was the one who had his senses about him to some degree, kind of thing. And so immediately afterwards, we had this debate, and again, this goes back to my learning of my experience of losing consciousness on a river and then being told, if I run out, I'll get out of there, that same day, kind of thing. And so I had a lot of valuable learning there in my own experience. And so Rolf's pretty stubborn, pretty insistent, and so he wanted me to just help him get to the other side of the river because the road isn't that far into the bush. And he could just walk down the road to the car, which was probably only, with his boat, 20-minute walk or something. And so we had a little bit of a debate / argument on that, just, and like, I'm pretty stubborn too. And so, I wasn't going to change my viewpoint because he didn't want to interfere with my day. He wanted me to carry on with the other boys, keep paddling the river. Whereas I was just like, dude, you're more important. Even though that's easy and we're going to get you to the other side of the river, and even though the road's right there, like, I've had this learning firsthand that, you don't leave someone alone, because I don't know what's going on underwater there. I don't know what mental state you're in. Yeah. I don't know if you've swallowed and taken in water. So, we are walking out of here together. Yeah. And you're not going to change my mind on that because I'm more stubborn than you are, Rolf. So we walked out of there, and as you do, pretty thankful. There's a bit of shock. There's a few after effects from an experience like that. All in all, we were pretty relieved and celebrated us, including Pete and Heather, and we're all pretty thankful Rolf didn't die, and had some beers to celebrate and stuff. And as you do, carried on with our trip.
And I figured if I ever got in that situation again, I wanted to be able to hold my breath longer. So that's how we got into that. The other big lesson is go out on the river or do these extreme sports with people you trust that got your back, because they can make the difference.
Yeah, there sounds like there's no doubt in that scenario that he did save your life. Probably most people would not have been able to do that. That's amazing.
No, they wouldn't, nor would they have had the will to put themselves at risk like that.
Absolutely.
To save my life.
Yeah, on a flooding river. Well, that's a wild story. That's intense in and of itself, but glad you're here.
I'm sweating a little bit right now.
Yeah.
After reliving that.
I'm sure you don't quite get over that ever in your life, huh?
Yeah.
I heard some version of that story where you had kind of, like, when you were pinned underwater, you had kind of given up at some point, like thought this is it. And then somehow that movement or relaxation might have flushed you off. Was there anything to that?
I think that's right. Right. I was really fighting hard, as you can imagine, and it was one of the more crushing experiences to have gone through. Is I was, call it living selfish at that point, and putting myself at a lot of risk, running a lot of big things and dangerous things. And at that moment, I thought about my mom and my dad getting a phone call, my brother getting a phone call, my girlfriend I was at the takeout getting the message, and it was just crushing. I realized I couldn't die there without having a tremendous impact on a lot of people, negative impact. And at that moment, I wanted nothing more than to live, and I had no control over it at that point. It was basically I had to surrender, and was preparing to die, and blacking out. And that, I think my body went limp, and somehow I got free with that limpness, and flushed off a little falls at the end, landed on rock. So it was like a drunk person in a car wreck, I think. I absorbed that shock, didn't break any bones or anything. And then it was at that base of that pool that Gareth jumped in and grabbed me, and we got flushed out and downriver, and he eventually got me in. But yeah, that was, like I said, it's making me sweat right now, reliving that.
Yeah, interesting how those close encounters with death, though, can be so life reaffirming. Right? That you appreciated everything you had, wanted to be there for everybody in your life at that point.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So it's I think it's a really important lesson as well, as with these extreme sports, like don't just think about yourself, think about the impact and all the people that will be left behind and have a hole in their life when you're gone.
Yeah, absolutely. But being who you are, you weren't going to quit kayaking. So, I think
some people were hoping I would, like my mom.
I'm sure. That's a mother's nightmare.
Yeah. That's how I think. Yeah, I am a mother's nightmare and have been for many, many years.
But enough positive that I'm sure she still loves you.
Yeah.
But you went back, you learned some lessons, you refined some of your skills, and you got back out on the river. So it was kind of the next stage of this journey.
Yeah, the next step, I take you to back to Oregon, where I grew up. And Tim Gross and I were out for another first descent. We had done he was a first descent machine. He was scoping rivers in his free time on maps and dragging me along and out on some of these. Most of them were terrible, and just sort of, just character building experiences, dragging boats through the woods and down and up over cliffs and things like that. But in this case, we went into the Salmon River Gorge coming off of Hood, and it was a spectacular run. We made a cardinal error, another good lesson to pass along to folks when you're scouting from the rim of a canyon. Multiply the drop size by 2 or 3. When you actually go in, you'll find it's a whole lot bigger. Anybody who's gone through that will know what I'm talking about. And I ended up breaking some ribs and hurting my back on Frustration Falls, which whoever named that, kudos to you. That is a brilliant name for that waterfall. But yeah, I hurt myself pretty materially on that falls and couldn't kayak after that. Anytime I was sitting in a boat, was experiencing a lot of pain.
Oh, that's rough.
Yeah. So we fast forward back to Colorado. I was hanging out in Colorado. It was springtime. The rivers were flowing. It was a little depressing because I was not kayaking. Another great lesson for any of those willing to listen is have a well-rounded life. Have more in your life than just one sport or any one thing. Because when it's taken from you, it can be a really, really tough, depressing time to go through as you try to become more balanced. So I'd say just start with the balance, be a balanced person, and then when you lose something, you got other things to fall back on.
Yeah, that's so true. You know, my mom was a psychologist before she retired, and she talked about how a lot of Olympians have huge problems after they finish their sport. You know, they'll, even ones that, got the gold medal, like realized all of their dreams because their whole life had been focused on this one thing, and all their time goes into this one thing. And then once it's accomplished, they just kind of hit this point of like, now what? I have nothing to do with my life. And there's like a pretty high rate of depression and problems that happen to these people after their career is over, or they've accomplished what they had intended to accomplish in that field. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I learned that one viscerally, the hard way. So I was sitting feeling sorry for myself in Golden, and a good friend of mine, Gary Edgeworth, which you should have on the podcast as well. That I call him a caricature of a human being.
You're not the first person that has suggested Gary to me, so we'll have to work on that.
Oh yeah, so entertaining, and the number of stories he has is mind-boggling. But he and I were out at Clear Creek, and I was tubing. I'd gotten an inner tube and was just floating down the river. He was at the playpark playing in the main hydraulic there. There was a bunch of people there, and I tubed through, and they didn't know, some of the people didn't know him and I were together, and I guess they cursed me under their breath as I floated by, like, damn guppy coming through on an inner tube, breaking up my whole ride. And Gary heard that, and Gary, he doesn't shy down from conflict.
To put it mildly.
I might even call him an instigator.
You're being very political on this one.
Oh, yeah. And so some trash talking ensued, and it sort of spilled out later onto the banks, and there might have been a couple beers involved in this. It's so long ago now, it's hard to remember. You might have to interview him to get some more details.
Yeah, we were at the Golden Play Park, and there were some kayakers that were kind of talking about some tubers in Clear Creek, and I had tubed Clear Creek. I had never tubed Rigor Mortis, but I had tubed Clear Creek a bunch, and that's kind of how I started. I was afraid to kayak because back then there was no clubs or anything. You had to know someone to go kayaking with. And I didn't really know anybody. And I just bought a kayak, and without ever sitting in one, I bought one and kind of, just bought it and went. But then for the first 6 months, that first year, I just inner tube because I'd always swim and didn't have anyone. And so, Rolf was being Rolf at the park and talking, like Rolf was a punk back then. He's a punk now, but he was a punk then. And, he just has this energy about him, and he's hard-headed and stubborn, and he's an amazing guy. And that, but yeah, he was like, oh, I'm going to go tube Rigor Mortis. And cause I hadn't done it, and I'm like, you're going to get slaughtered. And I think it's probably 400 or 500. It wasn't low by any means. It was respectable.
Yeah,
and,
a reasonable level. Rolf told it a little differently. He claims that you were the one that instigated the whole thing.
No way. There's nobody ever instigates anything with Rolf. Rolf, he hears something and gets ideas, and then it's Rolf time. But I instigated once he said he wanted to run Rigor Mortis. I pretty much started the car and was like, "Get in, let's go!" The talking part's the easy part. Let's go see it.
But basically, the long story short is, I ended up in a bet with somebody because Gary had said something like, this guy will tube anything that you run in a kayak. So I love that, right? I've got to put up for the bet here to make him whole.
Yeah, what a friend.
Yeah. Who needs enemies when you got a friend like that, right? So this bet gets made, and it's $100 or something like that. But for a college student, that's material.
Sure.
Right. And then when you're young and dumb, you've got this thing called ego. And so I actually remember going to bed and just like, oh man, maybe this will just disappear. Cause I had no idea how to tube. I had no idea how, I was scared of Rigor Mortis in a kayak. So
sure.
I still have a lot of respect for that rapid even today. And to do it in a tube seemed insane.
For anyone not familiar with it, that's like basically the hardest rapid on this class 4 or 5 section of Clear Creek, right? It's a class 5 rapid on a little creek above Golden.
That's right. Yeah. And I woke up the next morning and I went into an internship I had going on. And I remember my friend called me and said, do you know what's posted on Mountain Buzz? And Mountain Buzz is this old forum, like an old social network focused for kayakers and whitewater enthusiasts. And this bet was posted out there that on Friday I was going to be running Rigor Mortis in a tube. And my heart sank into my stomach at that point. I had no idea, right, how to tube, and I just started scrambling. And instead of doing the smart thing, right, and just tamping this down and bagging it, I said, well, if the bet's out there and my ego's on the line, I'm going to need to learn to tube in like 3 or 4 days here.
You're Gary's perfect sidekick in this one.
Yes, I was. Some friends learned over the years the best way to get Rolf to do something was to double dog dare him. I was the idiot in the Christmas story with my tongue stuck to the frozen pole. So anyway, I roped a friend into holding a throw bag for me, and I borrowed a tube that gets pulled behind a speedboat from somebody. It was a big tube, and I went upstream of the kayak park there and started to try to tube rapids, and quickly learned by getting my butt kicked over and over. I just kept getting flipped out of this tube and thrown off this tube by the river features, that it just wasn't working. And
that's those are still some class 4 rapids in that section above the canyon, right? That you were testing yourself on.
That's right. The Narrows was a big training ground. Or sorry, not the Narrows, the
Screaming Quarter Mile.
Screaming Quarter Mile. Yes, yeah. Thank you. So the Screaming Quarter Mile was the training ground, and I had to go back to the drawing board, and we went back. I actually went to a tire shop and just ordered a bunch of tube sizes. And went back up there and trialed different tubes, and it was like the 3 little bears, or the 3 bears, right, with Goldilocks. One was too small, one was too big, and I finally arrived on this perfect tube size, which was about a pickup truck tire size. That was the first main lesson: is I need the right size tube to let my feet dangle into the water to be able to kick, and then my arms hang off the end so I could paddle or stroke.
Yeah.
And so it's big
I
lesson.
guess you can't just go to the garage and ask them what the optimal size is for Rigo.
That's right. There's no consulting in this. It was pioneering in its basic form. So I then also learned, I kept going feet first, and I kept, again, getting flipped out of the tube. And by the way, I wasn't like in Boulder and your guy that went down the river. I imagine maybe he was missing a life vest, because I've seen them out there. No life vest, no helmet. Definitely do not recommend that. I was full safety gear, life vest, helmet, the works, even like thick wetsuit. I even tried things like knee pads and elbow pads for when I was swimming, so I didn't get as banged up. Yeah. During this learning process, because it was kind of a brutal learning curve.
Oh yeah, there's a few rocks in Clear Creek too, if that's where you're training.
Yeah, I'd recommend practicing in the Northwest on a good bedrock river, and not in the rocky Colorado mountains.
The blast rock.
Yeah, that's right. So I quickly also learned that I need to go backwards on an angle, and so I would stroke with my hands and throw my body into big waves or features or holes to be able to keep myself on the tube and in the river. And I was working my way up, and again had a good friend running along the side of the river hitting me with a throw bag every time I got knocked off. And come to Friday, I actually had tubed a fair amount of what I'd call the class 4, maybe 4+ sections with like the Narrows. Went down as well. Yeah. I didn't tube Rigo though. I was just saving my bruises and whatnot that were going to come for that day. And Friday came along, and I pulled up there, and I actually wasn't 100% sure I was going to do it. To be honest, I remember having some real doubts in my head. And I pulled up, and there was like 50 people on the banks collecting. Friday afternoon, people were socializing, and again I was like, oh man, now I'm gonna have to do this. Like, there's too many people that showed up.
No backing out.
Yeah, there's too much pressure.
Climbed up to the top of the diving board.
That's right. So then I'm and to make matters worse, one of Gary's friends, he might remember, who bought me a pair of water wings, and they not just any water wings, they were pink. They're like My Little Pony water wings or something to put on my ankles and arms. And I couldn't put them on my ankles because it inhibited my kicking.
Yeah.
So I ended up putting them up on my arms, and I'm walking up there, and this rangers or cops, I can't quite remember, pull up, and they jump out, and they're just like, "What the hell are you doing?" They're, I think all the people attracted them, and then they saw this idiot with an inner tube under his arm walking upriver, and they're like, "What are you doing?" And I explained to them what was about to happen, and they just started chewing me out. And I was actually a reasonable rule follower, so I was like, "Man, they're gonna arrest me or stop me from doing this. I don't know if they can they just tell me no, I can't do this." And I asked them at one point, and they're like, "Well, we can't stop you." And I was like, "Well, then I guess we're done here." And so I walked upstream.
So, he's kind of like, "Well, I got to get some." I'm all, no. Get in the car. We're going up there right now, and we're going to do it. So I drove him up there. There was 4 or 5 of us there. I think his girlfriend at the time, Heather, was there. And he got in there, put in right at the, at the top there, and proceeded to drop into the entrance and swam the rest of the rapid.
I did have my doubts because I imagined in my head, again, washing up on some beach drowned below and what the newspaper article might read afterwards, and that would be quite embarrassing.
Yes, your mom would not be very happy with that.
Yeah, I think I'd make a Darwin Award list, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, so first time down, I got demolished. I think I made it halfway down the rapid and then got knocked off and was pinballing. Maybe I held onto the tube, I think, and so I stayed reasonably on the surface. And then someone hit me with a rope. Some people hit me with a rope afterwards, swung me back in, and everyone sort of like patted me on the back and said, "Good job. That's it, right?"
And walked back up to do it again. He got killed in the second part of it. Again, that, the kind of the hole against the wall. Yeah. Ended up swimming the rest of it.
It's like, well, no, I didn't do it. So I walked back up to do it again. And you remember, I had a reputation, I guess, in the kayak community. I would run things over and over. If I messed something up, I kept going back up to do it until I got it.
I've seen you do that myself.
That's right.
Times when I wouldn't walk back up to do it again.
That's right. So I went back up, and the second time was actually demoralizing. I got knocked off early on. I was underwater the entire rapid, and I remember pinballing off of a few things. I balled up into the tightest ball that I possibly could. Again, where that breath holding practice comes into play.
Yeah.
I popped up at the bottom, and someone hit me with a rope and swung me back in.
And then the third time, he did this amazing boof on the entrance, landed flat and out of the hole, didn't even go in it. And then he did another great boof on the second one and ran it just how you'd run it in a kayak, worked it, kind of around that diagonal hole right above the big hole, and then moved right and went around it and cleaned it. And we had to listen to that for about a week, how we got these amazing boofs on an inner tube. And
I went up to go do it again. And actually, funny enough, third time's the charm. I remember hanging on by a thread and barely making it through that bottom big hole. And I got my $100. And
nice.
That the next big lesson on there was, there's going to be plenty of naysayers in life telling you can't do something. If it hasn't been done before, people are going to call you an idiot and all sorts of names, but sometimes you got to have conviction and persevere and have confidence in yourself.
It was pretty fun. Like, I mean, but that's what we did. We, back in the day, like Mountain Buzz, like you said earlier, you talked a lot of shit and you had fun. You didn't take yourself serious. And Rolf's definitely that guy that doesn't take himself serious, but he's an amazing athlete. He's amazing at a lot of things. So, but yeah, that was a fun night. That happened one evening too. But yeah, I definitely wasn't letting him off the hook on that one. Like I drove him once he started talking about it. It was like, we're not going to sit here and talk about it. Let's just go up there and see it. And he cleaned it on the third try. So, I mean, he like cleaned it. Like any kayaker would have been proud of that line.
Yeah, you won that one. Did Gary take a cut, like a commission or something?
I don't remember, but he probably did. Yeah,
he should have been buying you a beer.
That's right.
All right, well, that's awesome. So you had your first your first true tubing victory, even with a monetary reward. So where did you take your tubing next?
Yeah, so I actually moved. I took a job, a real job. I had to get work and took a job in Alaska. So I moved to Alaska, of all places.
Yeah.
Still couldn't kayak, which was really hard, really tough. There's a handful of rivers up there around Anchorage, and I was still on occasion teaming up with some kayakers. Anybody who was willing to go along with the fool with a tube. I can tell you more than once I showed up at a river where people were like, who in the hell is this guy? And no, I don't want to boat with him.
I've heard some funny ducking stories about a class 5 duckier that used to be around Colorado that had some very similar things like that. Like, what are you doing? What are you pumping up? No, we're not going to paddle with you. But the tube is probably taking it to another level.
Yeah, I think it was in Alaska. And, I showed up with a wetsuit, mind you. And after that first day out,
33-degree water or something like that.
That first day out, I had myself a dry suit. I dropped the hundreds of dollars and was like, I absolutely need a dry suit.
I'll bet.
Another big lesson along the way was dry suit, and then having some low-profile pads underneath the dry suit, because with a wetsuit, you got nice padding on there. Dry suit, a lot less padding, so those hits don't feel as good.
For sure.
And yeah, take it next. I show up next. Sort of entertaining story up there that ties into this is we were going to do a river called the Talkeetna. A group of us. It was a rafting trip. Actually, with kayakers, it's a 3-day trip. It's a big water river up there coming off of Rainier. And I went to, I showed up at the tire store, ordered my truck tire, and drove off. And we went up to the river and we're flying in. There was a fly-in, mind you, so we're way in there. There's no roads. There's no anything. And the first day is pretty casual. I just stayed in the raft and relaxed. And then the second day we got to there's a main canyon there, big water, class 4. And the raft dropped me off on the bank and I started pumping up the tube. And I don't remember why, maybe it was just a hard place to sit, but the raft took off downstream with a couple of the boaters, and a couple of boaters or kayakers waited with me. And I pumped this tube up and I realized, again, my stomach bugs or stomach butterflies and my heart shrank because this tube, it's not the right size. It's not getting to the right size. It was a donut, like something I'd sit on when I broke my tailbone.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, no, this isn't going to hold my body weight. And sure enough, I sit down in the river and I'm like submerged. The tube's submerged underwater. I tried pumping it up more and it just doesn't work because I can't even sit in it because the hole gets so narrow, my butt doesn't fit.
Yeah.
So I'm literally just swimming down this big water canyon with a donut for like flotation, a little bit of flotation, but just swimming in bitter cold water, coming off of a glacier. So that was also character building and toughening up. So always check your equipment before going out there, and never trust the stoner behind the counter at the tire shop to get you the right size tire.
The lessons are building up.
They are.
You need the physical fitness, you need the technique, you need the equipment. That's
right. So we're building our skill set and our tools here.
I like it.
The next story we bring in takes place in Chile. And I went on a climbing trip down to Chile. It was several weeks, and in climbing in Patagonia, it was a spectacular time, but we decided to stop off at the Futaleufu River to do some rafting. We didn't have any gear. The friend I was with, who was a climber and a kayaker, he wanted to boat the river. And so I said, yeah, I'll just find a raft company and we'll join on with them, and you can kayak and I can raft. And we teamed up with this company called Bio Bio. Mm-hmm. It's where I first met the Alex Nix, a famous, very famous
legend in kayaking,
legend in the community. You should interview him for sure.
Yeah, I would love that.
I think he's been kayaking for over 40 years in some of the most exotic places in the world.
Yeah, he was at the forefront of everything in Africa, right, on the Zambezi, when people were just figuring out what you could and couldn't do in a kayak.
Yep, that's right. I remember watching kayak videos of him running stuff down there and being inspired.
Yeah, I have a mildly funny story about meeting him, because we just met him on Clear Creek, because he lives around here now, and we were doing it at, it was like high-ish water, and he took out what is it, the boat he always paddles? It's like Dagger Redline, I think.
That's
it's
right.
Like, just no matter what, he pulls out that Dagger Redline.
No volume, sharp edges.
Yeah, just one of those little cartwheel boats, right?
Yeah.
From the 90s or something. And I'm just watching him paddle. I'm like, man, this guy, he knows what he's doing. Like, he looks good. He's just out there surfing every wave, catching it, like going back and forth. And I was talking to Cruz. And I was like, yeah, that guy's pretty good, huh? And he's like, yeah, I used to have a poster of that guy up on my wall when I was a kid growing up and learning to kayak. I was like, oh, okay.
That's right. Yeah. Did you hear the story of him going to the Kings?
No, I don't think I've heard that one.
Yeah.
Unless it involves barefoot hiking, which I'm sure it did. Yeah.
It's a 13-mile hike in over a 12,000-foot pass. And for those of you who don't know, Alex Nix kayaks barefoot. And he brought some flip-flops and hiked the hike in. Mind you got a 100-pound boat with all the gear, paddle, water, food for 5 days. Hiked in flip-flops for 13 miles into the Kings, and then paddled the Kings barefoot the entire time.
That's mind-blowing. It goes back into like the Wim Hof stuff, where Wim Hof is like tapped into some of the skills that we have that we just don't know how to unlock anymore. And I think that's the same thing, right? We probably have that in us to all be barefoot hikers. We just put on shoes from the moment we're little kids, and
we've gotten soft, is what you're saying.
I think so. That's my theory.
I might have, maybe those of us, we got a little more Cro-Magnon in our DNA still from, because you got to think those people were tough, right? Ice ages, hunting woolly mammoths.
Absolutely.
Humans used to be tough. Now we got to sit around 70 degrees in temperature, or we're too hot, or we're too cold. We got to wear shoes. We got to drink really nice wine, or we're complaining. We got to eat really good processed food, or God, yeah, we've gotten soft, I think.
I think our bodies are inherently lazy, right? Unless we tell it that it needs to do something, it's going to take the lazy route.
Yeah. So I admire, you're right, people like Nix and Wim Hof for how tough they are.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
I aspire to be that tough one day. Gary E. actually has a great quote. If you're going to be dumb, you better be tough. And I think there's a lot of truth to that.
That is a classic. Yeah.
So, anyway, we show up to the Bio Bio camp, and I'm going to raft. He's going to kayak. We meet Alex Nix and a group of folks.
I was a safety kayaker for many years on the Futaleufu for a company called Bio Expeditions out of California. They were running a multi-day trip from one campsite because the weather can be quite inclement down there. And so they had a sauna and a hot tub. And I lost contact with Rolf for years, actually, and then bumped back into him again in Denver. And I'm like, you are the guy that drowned in the hot tub, aren't you? And so he was on the Futaleufu boogie boarding in a plastic sort of alpine boogie board, one of the older fashioned ones. I remember that.
I didn't hear that one.
Yeah. And having a good time, but I kind of dismissed him really because I was just so focused on paddling and enjoying the waves myself. What I do remember is his antics in the hot tub. So again, it's a multi-day trip in clement weather, so we had this hot tub for everybody to warm up in at the end of the day, and people would drink and enjoy. And for some reason, Rolf decided that he wanted to try and prove how long he could hold his breath, and he would sort of stick his head under in the middle of the pool, and we were all having beers around the edge and enjoying, and he kept doing this. And then on the fifth or sixth or God knows what attempt, we were drinking and we just watched him sort of floating face down towards us. And we said, do you think we should have a look at him? And one of the other guys said, yeah, that's probably not good. He's been there for a while now. And we sort of flipped him over, and he was kind of a hypoxic grey colour and not breathing.
Oh, my God.
And so we dragged him out of the hot tub, and we were about to start CPR, and he kind of sort of spontaneously came back. But that was his claim to fame while I was down there.
And we go down the river, and I am on the raft. But about halfway down the river or so, I get kicked off the raft. And basically, I wanted to steer the raft towards all the biggest features and go through the biggest features. And the people on the raft were antithetical to that and didn't want to go through big features and wanted to avoid the features. And so the raft guide was telling him to go left, and I was yelling and trying to throw my voice to sound like him. Go right. There's a huge hole here. We got to gut it.
That's awesome.
So I literally got kicked off the raft. Like I wasn't able to raft after that because nobody wanted me on the raft with them.
No, that sounds like some forest stories I've heard. But
yeah, so then the idea comes back up, well, tubing. Could this be tubed? And at first,
Sure.
It sounded crazy because it's really big water. It's pretty intimidating, but
really big water. I mean, I've been down there, and the first time I paddled down it, I mean, it was manageable, but it was like nothing I'd felt before. I felt like I was in the ocean.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. It can definitely feel like that, especially in some of those crashing holes where you're just getting spun like a washing machine.
Yeah, and whirlpools and big eddy line fences and all that.
Oh, yeah. So I get myself my truck tire tube. It's the right size. And I put on the river with a group of kayakers one day or the next day. And we come up to the first rapid, and we had a little safety talk. I remember some of them were raising an eyebrow at the moron with the tube as well. My friend Brady was with me, and we start running the river. I can't get out of the current. I'm like a log in the river, subject to the whim of the current. I'm downriver. I can't eddy out. I'm just flushing from one rapid into the next. And I finally get into like a eddy fence that you're talking about, swirling around at the bottom of this big rapid. Not because I paddled into it, because the river just flushed me or rejected me into it.
Oh, wow. And
I sat there catching my breath. And my friend, who's loyal, at least was following me down. He was putting me on the sharp end as I was bombing into these things. And it was funny because the group of kayakers finally show back up, and the head guy just chews me out. He gives me the hardest time, and he's like, "You arrogant little blah, 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 blah." And I was like, whoa, back off, dude. I couldn't stop. Like, I literally could not get out of the current, couldn't get off the river. So I actually called it that day, got off the river, and a little bit later, maybe around a campfire or something, we're thinking, you know what I need is some flippers, some fins, so I can have some more control, some more power, because I was powerless out there. And we managed to dig up some fins in Chile in the middle of nowhere. And I go back to the river the next day, right? Try again, put the fins on, get on the river. Luckily, the kayakers were willing to accept me into the group again. And success. I actually have control, and I can maneuver back and forth and maneuver around things. And that was a big light bulb and a spectacular day. I remember just for the ability to actually maneuver and get around things was pretty critical.
Yeah, another piece of the puzzle falling into place.
Another piece of the puzzle, absolutely. A side story to that was I actually ended up running everything on the Futaleufu except for Zeta, I think they call it.
Yeah, that's impressive.
Yeah, and someone had died in Zeta. A kayaker died there not too long before, so I figured it was best, going back to that Turnbull lesson in New Zealand, my mom not getting that call, I'm going to walk this one.
Yeah, good call.
Everything else, though, I ran. And the Terminator Rapid was a hell of an experience, though, because I got caught in the Terminator hole. I did not maneuver around that.
Which is one of the biggest holes in the river, if not the biggest.
One of the biggest holes. One of the biggest holes I've ever been in.
Oh, I'll bet.
And I went round. I washing machine for a while in there, but I had the tube, and I had enough flotation that I kept popping up and getting pulled back in, but I was breathing, getting plenty of air. So it was actually a confidence-inspiring experience, because I was like, I'm in the biggest, baddest hole on this entire river, and I'm fine. So it was super confidence-inspiring, and
wow.
Really gave me a bump up. I was ready to run anything at that point.
I mean, it reminds me a little bit of an experience I had on Gore during one of the races where I wasn't racing, and we were paddling down, and we encountered one of these river border guys. Maybe this was a separate story, but it was river border on Gore. But he didn't know where he was going, and so he was like scouting some little like 1 foot drop, because everything looks like a waterfall. And you're, they call themselves dick draggers, right? So when you're dick dragging, and so he latches on to us. He's like, "Yeah, my buddy ditched me. Like, could I follow you guys?" And we're like, "Yeah, sure, you can follow us." And we get to Toilet Bowl, which is probably the nastiest hole on the river there, and he just goes and like guts it down the middle and just goes deep and like gets totally stuck in the hole. And I'm thinking, oh no, he's swimming. I don't know. Like, he's already swimming. I don't know. Yeah. And he just takes his board and he throws it onto the eddy line, like on the boil line there, and he just starts kicking with his flippers. And sure enough, he just like kicks himself right out of the hole. And that's where I think that was kind of what you're saying, is like, there's a realization there for me that like, normally, I would say this is a horrible tool for running rivers compared to a kayak, but in certain situations, it has its advantages, right? When
things go pear-shaped and you're in a massive hydraulic, I can tell you what tool set I'd want all day long.
Yeah.
And it's not a kayak and a paddle.
Yeah, that tube's your lifeline.
Yep.
Cool. All right, so you kind of figured out all the pieces of the gear coming together now after this trip to Chile. And then kind of what's the next evolution in your journey here?
Well, then actually a wrench gets thrown in, because I go to see a doctor who tells me, and anybody with a back injury, pay attention to this. I still had back pain, and this doctor instead of doing surgery on me, he said, make it your job, just like your job. Go to Pilates and yoga like 3-4 times a week, and do this to see what happens with your back. You'll strengthen your intercostals and psoas and all these muscles here that stabilize your core. And my back pain went away. So I was on the verge of getting surgery for this, and the yoga and Pilates saved me.
That's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they were going to fuse your back and some...
They were actually going to go in and, carve off parts of my disc that were bulging.
I see.
So I got some pretty serious bulge discs from that injury on the Salmon River Gorge, I think. And I was able to avoid that with yoga and Pilates of all things.
Huh. That's amazing. Yeah.
Anybody who knows me, and you know me, so you've seen this, I stretch beforehand, getting on the river, afterwards. I'm always stretching.
Yeah.
It's pretty critical.
Just has to be a constant habit.
Yeah, make it a habit. It'll make your whatever extreme sport career or any sport career extend so much longer and help you recover from all those injuries.
Yeah, well, that's awesome that you were able to get back into a kayak at that point, but it must have cramped your tubing career a little bit.
It did, because I was having to choose a craft, right? It was like, choose this nice sports car, which is what I consider a kayak, or like this Oscar Mayer Wienermobile over here. And as you can imagine, I chose the kayak more and more, and so the tubing started to fall to the wayside.
But I've heard of some of these stories that because you were still concerned about your back, but you were back in your kayak, that you would actually toss the tube and pump in the back of your boat until you got to a big drop that you were concerned about. Is this true?
This, yeah. If there's a good sized waterfall, yeah, I'd break the tube out as long as the group had patience and tube off the waterfall as opposed to kayaking off of it.
So you'd like throw and go the kayak and
that's right.
Tube off of it.
Some big slides too. I was living in North Carolina and ran some things there, and in Georgia and whatnot, like the Tallulah gorge and some things out there.
Oh, including that big, what do they call it, the thing or whatever that big slide is?
Yeah, that's right. So tubing was making its debut on occasion, but it was falling to the wayside a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'd say the next big point of the story would be on a trip with some New Zealand friends in the Northwest. Actually, we started in California and made our way north for a summer, and we were kayaking mostly, but I was also breaking out the tube, like you said, pulling it out of the back of the boat to run various things, waterfalls and some certain parts of rivers that look like they'd be quite fun. And probably the highlight of that was the Little White. I pulled the tube out at Spirit Falls, and I actually tubed off Spirit Falls. There's video of this. Isaac Priestley, who used to make videos, he actually filmed this. I wish I had a copy. I wish I had it, but yeah, he filmed me, and I stuck it.
Nice.
Yeah, I literally launched clear of the curtain, landed on the pile, soft as can be, paddled away.
I think I'm most scared about chaos afterwards.
Me too. Yeah, and actually I ran chaos as well, if you can believe that. I ran the rest of it in a tube, or maybe because actually I think I ran Spirit and then chaos, and then I had to get back in the kayak or drag the kayak down because there's no other way to get the boat out of there. So I ran those two things on the Little White.
That's crazy. So this might be the biggest thing you've run in a tube at that point.
It was, yeah. And it went really well. So again, I had a big boost of confidence, right?
Yeah.
And I think the next part of the story, we're in Hood River, and we're hanging out with some kayakers. And I got to give a little backdrop here. I grew up in Oregon, and my parents would take me hiking from a little kid into Eagle Creek. And so I'd been staring at Eagle Creek. Like I said, Tim and I got the first descent on that way back in the day. And I'd been staring at Metlako for years and wanting to run that. We actually wanted to run it a couple times. We went into Eagle Creek, but people in the group kept getting injured, so it didn't happen. Like one of the times I injured my shoulder on Punchbowl Falls, and I hiked out instead of heading downstream, and the group usually gave up before hitting that up.
Yeah. And
so it was this beautiful, exotic like untouchable thing to this point.
Because it's like a perfect entrance into a perfect falls into a perfect pool. It's just the height is something that kayakers have not touched at that point, right?
That's right.
Or it's definitely at least at the limit.
I think it's the most perfect waterfall of that size I've ever seen, just because you're right. You can't screw up the entrance. It's super narrow. There's only one way to go. It's sloping down, so you get a nice transition into the vertical drop, and then it's aerated. The pool's safe at the bottom. There's nothing that dangerous down there, so it is a perfect waterfall. And Dave Grove was the one to first D the waterfall, so kudos to him. But we were hanging out in Hood River with a bunch of kayakers, and my New Zealand buddies brought up, hey, why don't you go up and tube Metlako and tube Eagle Creek? And
sounds like your Kiwi stand-in for Gary E, huh?
That's right. All I need now is for them to make a bet, right, with somebody where I'm on the hook. So actually, I chuckled. I was laughing at that and chuckling at it. I can't say that it didn't spark my interest. And I was curious about the idea, and I actually went to the bathroom, and somebody in the group said to my Kiwi friends who overhear this, he's going to hike in there, take one look, tuck his tail between his legs, and hike right back out. And they told me that, and I was like, oh, hell no.
Well, you know what's funny is so I'm good friends with Eric Boomer, and you know I'd always go up to Hood River and hang out with Boomer, and Boomer was there when Rolf tubed Metlako.
Oh, and, yeah, Rolf told me that, yeah.
And Boomer, like, you know, told me that story of, like, you know, where Davis had just set the world record on Metlako, and he was in a bar, and Rolf was like, shit, I would tube that. Give me a break, you know, this and that, because Davis was just peacocking. And Davis did the same thing. He's like, well, let's see it.
So I think people didn't believe I was going to do it. The word had kind of gotten out, and I was like, yeah, next day, let's do it. Let's go in there. Let's run this thing. And actually, the only person that ended up believing me was, other than the Kiwis, was Eric Boomer hiked in with us. And so we hiked all the way up. We actually ran a bunch of the river. I tubed a bunch of the river, including Punchbowl Falls. Everything went really well. We got down to Metlako, and I can't say that I wasn't scared. It was pretty darn intimidating.
I would hope so.
Yeah, and
you know, Boomer's like, yeah, it was crazy. Like, he just went up there with a tube and sent Metlako, and like Boomer said, it's like when he landed dead flat, and his face and his knees just folded together, and he went through the hole of the tube.
I ended up running it. I tried to land it like I did the other waterfalls.
Did you have the flippers on and everything?
I think I ditched the fins, if I remember.
Didn't really need it for that kind of thing. I didn't need it
for that. So any extra clutter, I ditched. And my friend Tim Gross, he's back in the picture again. He was with us, actually, and he was on a rope hanging on the edge of the cliff, ready to jump off, you know, in case I came up like face down or something at the bottom. So we had some good safety in place. And when I landed, so first of all, the fall, it seemed to take forever. I was just counting like 1,000, 2,000. I was like, holy smokes, when am I going to hit the bottom here? And when I hit, it was like a freight train ran me over, maybe we'll say a small bus. And my legs tacoed into my face is how it's, so a pike position. I just smacked together into the pike. My knees actually hit me in the face. pretty hard, such that if I had a glass jaw, maybe it would have knocked me out. But
Yeah.
I went, butt first down through the tube like a watermelon seed, and floated up, giggling and laughing because I wasn't hurt.
You knew right away you were okay.
I knew I was okay. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So that, and then,
I mean, Metlako is 80 something feet tall, right? Like it's a huge waterfall.
yeah, I think pool to pool, it's 100 feet. And then from where it goes vertical, it's 80 plus feet from there.
Tiny slide into the vertical.
Yeah, it is.
That is wild.
It is big. And I'm still waiting on my sponsorship from Firestone or Goodyear. I did lob in a few calls, and I think they're like, who in the hell?
Did you actually call them?
I did, I think, yeah.
That's classic.
Yeah. I was like, these companies are big. They make way more money than any of these dinky kayak companies. And, maybe if I convince them to put some Goodyear kayak or stickers on my kayak and paddle and an inner tube.
Hey, man, that seems like a brilliant marketing idea. I don't know why they didn't bite.
I probably just didn't pursue it doggedly enough.
You didn't go big enough.
I did get something out of this stunt, call it, that actually changed the course of my life, funny enough.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've heard this. I got my career going in finance with this stunt, if you can believe that.
I heard a little bit about this, but not the full story. I'd actually heard that when you were in an interview, they made some reference to being concerned about whether you would show up on Monday if they hired you.
That's right. There were jokes going around, like people wanting to take out insurance policies. These are investors, right? And bettors.
They're looking at the
betting
dollar signs.
market, and they're like, what are the chances that he doesn't show up on a Monday? I think I'd like to pay for that option to collect a couple $1 million policy. But funny enough, it's the opposite. And so I am an investor in my career now, and in investing, I'm pretty conservative, very conservative, in fact. And I was in this interview down in Santa Fe, and interviewing. It was like a whole day of interviews and whatnot. And I really wanted this job because most of the work for finance and investing is in Manhattan and Chicago and places, big cities where it's hard to get out into the outdoors. And I was an outdoor person by nature. So I really wanted this work or this job in this remote outpost of Santa Fe. And I was interviewing, and one of the interviewees, this gruff older guy who'd had a lot of experience, and it's remarkable how few people pull up Google and Google you and things like that when they're doing an interview. I think they think their intuition, and they can just read your personality, which I never trust anymore, because I know people can fake anything for an hour or even a half a day of interviews.
Sure.
So it's a good idea, and this guy did his homework. Obviously, because it was like 5 to 10 minutes of pleasantries. And then he cocks an eyebrow at me and says, "Rolf, do you tube?" And again, my stomach just fell out because things had been going good up to this point. And I was like, oh my God, I'm toast. Like, it's over, right?
Yeah. I should have hid my internet identity.
Yeah, I should have used a fake name, right? A pseudonym for all these things, these tubing stunts. And so literally the rest of the interview, I'm explaining to him how this is actually quite calculated, that I wasn't just trying to commit suicide, and this was, pure stupidity. He's asking me questions like, well, how do you know there's not a log at the bottom of the falls? It's like, well, you got to read the water, and there's certain hydraulics that hold things in, and there's certain hydraulics that spit things out, and this hydraulic spits things out. So it was that type of questioning for 45 minutes. And of course, I'm sweating again during this. And
he's like testing your analytic ability and your planning abilities and stuff.
You're right. Yeah, he was. And so I leave for the day, and I fly back to North Carolina. And I think I'm done. Like, right? There's no way I'm getting this job. And what I find out later is everyone gets together in this boardroom and they're discussing my candidacy. And the biggest criticism is this guy's too conservative. He's not willing to take enough risk here. He's not going to fit in here at this place. And this guy slaps the table and is like, people, he ran 100-foot waterfall in a damn inner tube. He's not too conservative. Like this guy can take risks. And so that's the story. I actually ended up getting the job. I don't think I would have gotten it otherwise by the sounds of it.
Yeah, that's amazing. But you stood out in a way that nobody else, I'm sure, that day in the interview stood out.
That's right. Afterwards, maybe I should put it on my resume, right?
See, people say that, kayaking ruins your career path. You end up in a van down by the river, but here's a counterpoint to that. Kayaking can launch your career.
That's right. And it's amazing where luck can take a turn, right? And luck changes the course of your life like that. It takes 10 or 20 years to be an overnight success, which again, I put in quotes.
Yes, there you go. So that definitely tells the tale.
Most people wouldn't put this high up on their list as a target for success, right? I want to be this job or marry this person or get rich. Not many people say, I want to be really good at tubing.
I have to ask the obvious question because, there's the famous Sir Edmund Hillary quote about why did you climb Mount Everest? And he says, because it's there, which I interpret as kind of like your question is just dumb because there's no answer to it, right? But what is the motivation? What do you think motivated you to do this stuff? Anyone can go get a tube and run this stuff, but you actually decided to do it.
I've been accused of being an adrenaline junkie over the course of my life. I bristle a little bit at that, but I got to accept that I do enjoy high risk. It's a way for me to reach enlightenment, I think, and be in the moment, be in that perfect moment and not thinking about the past or the future or my work or any problems going on. I'm sure, as you know, as a whitewater kayaker and sports enthusiast, that moment, there's complete peace. It's a wonderful state. It's a flow state.
Yeah.
That I love being in. And then the second part of it is problem solving. I love picking apart problems and making things possible that don't appear possible at first glance. So it's the attraction of running big rapids and big cascading rapids, things like Next Generation on the Black Canyon. It's picking that apart and making something that hasn't gone before, make that go and solve that problem.
Yeah, what a great answer, because it's how our species evolves as humans. And you could say maybe evolving tubing isn't that important, but nonetheless, people that push the boundaries are the ones that evolve what we can do as humans and in this world, right? And without that, we would just be static. We just repeat the same cycle over and over again through generation and generation.
That's right. And I should give a shout out. Actually, Tom Janney and Christian
Cook. Yeah.
Christian Cook was actually the first one to run all of Next Generation from top to bottom.
Yeah, which is amazing. That's a burly rapid.
That is.
So what's next in tubing? Is there a next for you, or are you passing the torch?
I might need to pass the torch at this point. Maybe it's to my daughter.
You might be careful what you wish for.
Yeah. Actually, you'll find this amusing. When people asked, do you want a boy or a girl? When my wife and I were having a kid, and I kept saying I actually want a girl because I don't want a boy. Because if the boy ends up wired like me, I'm going to stress like my mom and dad have the rest of my life, wondering what crazy stuff he's getting up to. And people did point out, well, you can have a crazy girl too, you realize that. And she's showing a few of those tendencies, wanting to like
Uh-oh.
jump head first off the bed and things like that, which is a little unsettling. It's like, Sophie, this is called gravity, and this is how we break bones. So she's going to have to learn her own path, and her own hard knocks are going to teach her.
Yeah, well, you've still got time to train her, and but yeah, she's a high risk coming from the parents that she has, I think.
That's right, because my wife is a big rock climber.
Yeah.
So
at least you have ropes when you climb rock. Or most people use ropes when they go rock climbing. That helps with the safety a bit.
that's right. Yeah.
All right, Rolf. Well, thanks so much. Any parting thoughts, or are we good?
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure, and thanks for doing this podcast. I really enjoyed some of the stories that you've had on, or some of the characters that you've had on, like Forrest Noble. What a nut.
What a nut.
Yeah. And I've recommended a few other nuts that you should look up. Gordon Banks, Gareth Fryer, Gary Edgeworth, Alex Nix. They're going to have some entertaining stories for you.